let's come over and take a look at Eusebius. So in the Net Bible, right here, I have the big chonky one with the 60,000 notes in it. I like it, but, you know, I don't have to agree with all the notes. I clearly... It's definitely the highest, like the most intense treatment of all the footnotes. And I mean, that's what it's supposed to do. It's the Net Bible, right? So if I pull, you know what? Let me pull it up here. Maybe if I pull it up here. There it is. Whoop. All right. So the Gospel of Mark ends at this point in some witnesses. Okay. And they provided all the witnesses. So Aleph, B, Syriac, Sahidic, was only based on the Armenian manuscripts. Then it says we've got Eusebius, and then Eusebius's manuscripts as support for ending at verse 8. And we're going to take a closer look at that because I think what's happening here is we're misinterpreting what Eusebius is saying. But let's continue on here. So I found this. And this is kind of exciting. This is so exciting in a very nerdy way. All right. This is Roger Pearce's translation of the letters of ad Marinus, the letters of Eusebius to Marinus. And actually, what is not letters is kind of the wrong word, but kind of, sort of. So what Eusebius did is he collected a bunch of questions in regards to some difficulties between the various accounts in the gospel. So, you know, why does this gospel say this, but then that gospel says that, kind of deal. And so he kind of set out to answer some of these questions. And a number of these questions came from a gentleman by the name of Marinus. Now, I don't think hieratic. That's it. Yes, hieratic Egyptian. Okay. So anyway, so Marinus sent a whole bunch of these questions to Eusebius, and then Eusebius kind of like took it and ran with it and decided to answer all these questions and to write them. It was actually really interesting. So I've been kind of reading through a little bit of this, but this is the one in question where we're talking about Mark 16, 9 through 20. So that's just an introductory. I mean, you can read that on your own time. I'll probably put a link in the description once the live stream is done, and then you can... excuse me, and then you can come and see that for yourself. But anyway, so Eusebius says, well, here's your first question. And the question that Marinus had sent him was this: how is it that the Savior's resurrection evidently took place in Matthew late on the Sabbath, but in Mark early in the morning on the first day of the week? So Marinus is seeing this as you know, something that's hard to reconcile. Maybe it's a contradiction or something. Eusebius goes to answer this, and he comes up with two answers, okay? The second answer, we'll come back to the first one, okay? But the second answer, another view from someone different about athetizing anything at all in the text of the gospel. Okay, athetizing just means to take it out. Okay, so he's saying about not taking it out, all in the text of the gospel. However transmitted is that there's a twofold reading, as in many other places, and that both are to be accepted. It is not for the faithful and devout to judge either as acceptable in preference to the other. So we'll come back to his first reasoning, but his second reasoning is, well, I mean, they're just different. We'll just embrace the mystery and move on. So I'm sure most people wouldn't find that very helpful. In the third one, his way of dealing with the supposed contradiction is to say this. Supposing the latter point of view to be granted as true, the proper thing to do with the reading is to interpret its meaning. If we were to divide up the sense of the wording, we would not find it in conflict with the words in Matthew to the effect that the Savior's resurrection was late on the Sabbath, because we shall read the words in Mark, having risen again early in the morning, with a pause, punctuating after having risen again, and making a break in the sense before the following words. Let us then refer, having risen again, back to Matthew's late on the Sabbath. So he's saying, punctuate it. Put the punctuation right there, and it matters. And it makes all the difference in the world. So I won't go ahead and read the rest of it because we're not really interested in the punctuation of this verse, though that is a really interesting conversation. But if we come up to his first reasoning, okay, this is the one we're talking about when it comes to Mark 16, 9 through 20. This is the one, the reason why we see Eusebius as listed as a witness to the ending at verse 8. It's here. So he says the answer to this would be twofold. The actual nub of the matter is the pericope, which says this: one who athetizes, okay, and he defined that. Athetizes means marks the passage as spurious. So notice that he is not marking the passage as spurious. He is speaking as in a hypothetical situation as one who would think that this is a good way to go. And he says, one who athetizes that pericope would say that it is not found in all copies of the gospel according to Mark. So this is not Eusebius stating that. This is not Eusebius commenting on whether or not all manuscripts don't have the end of the Gospel of Mark. He's not saying that. He's setting up a scenario and saying, well, if somebody is into that sort of thing, they might come up to you and say, hey, we don't see this in all the copies of the Gospel of Mark. And apparently Jerome referred back to this when it said of him that he had, what was it? It was said of Jerome that he had looked at this very writing from Eusebius when he quoted that there were no Greek manuscripts around him. Again, he wasn't saying that there were none, but was referring back to another writing. And that makes total sense now, because then we have to ask the question, well, why did Jerome put the long ending of Mark in the Vulgate? Well, he put the long ending of Mark in the Vulgate because he had it in front of him, and he was using Eusebius here. Anyway, so let's continue on. So accurate copies end their text of the Markan account with the words of the young man whom the woman saw and who said to them, "Do not be afraid, it is Jesus the Nazarene that you are looking for," etc. After which it adds, "And then they heard this, they ran away and said nothing to anyone because they were frightened." So again, this is Eusebius, pretending, right? Setting up a hypothetical. That is where the text does end in almost all copies of the Gospels according to Mark. What occasionally follows in some copies, not all, would be extraneous, most particularly if it contains something contradictory to the evidence of the other evangelists. That, then, would be one person's answer, to reject it entirely, obviating the question as superfluous. Okay? So this is not Eusebius stating that there were no manuscripts that contain it Greek. He was just playing the devil's advocate, so to speak. He was just pretending to be one who might argue in this way as a potential solution. Ironically enough, doesn't say whether or not Eusebius found this specific argument helpful. So Eusebius and Eusebius's manuscripts as listed in here. Okay, so when it says Eusebius and Eusebius manuscripts, they really shouldn't be in there. I don't think they should be in there. That's not what Eusebius is saying. That's not his state. The most you could say is that Eusebius knows people who might use this argument. And it sounds like Eusebius is, what's the term? The term's leaving my mind. It sounds like Eusebius is really making it bigger than what it is. I can't get that word in my head. So this is the paragraph here. That then would be one person's answer. It does not say that it's Eusebius's answer. And I think to suggest that it is Eusebius' answer would be very difficult to say that there's no certainty that that's the case. So to reject it entirely, obviating the question. Obviously, Eusebius thinks there's something to Mark 16, 9 through 20, because he goes on to suggest that maybe we just live with it as it is. And then he goes on to propose a solution, harmonizing the two. So there's a little bit more to it than that. Now, with that being said, we've spent so much time on Eusebius, and we've been looking at Eusebius in the New English Translation, in the notes there. My question is, why doesn't the New English Translation add Marinus as support for Mark 16, 9 through 20? Obviously, Marinus in the 3rd century, he's looking at his manuscripts and he's seeing, this contradiction, and he's writing to Eusebius to figure out how to reconcile the two. So Marinus has the long ending of Mark, and we overlook that all the time. I have not seen many people talk about Marinus.